Machen's notes on Galatians. Thankfully John Skilton edited those and got them into print. But what triggered Machen to write those chapters in Christianity Today on Galatians at that time? What was the historical context? I mean, was that the same liberalism struggle? Was that an answer to that?
Well, I think at the practical level, it was probably his turn as one of the editors of the magazine to supply something. And he was probably trying to do something that was relatively easy for him compared to other things that he might do. Because this was at the time, I believe, of the missions controversy and when the independent board was gearing up. But specifically, whether, it's been such a long time since I looked at those that I can't necessarily see references directly to the controversies of the time. My recollection is that he played it fairly straight and didn't try to use that as a mechanism to get at liberals or to get at the Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions or something.
Okay.
At the end of those notes, there's a review of Edwin Burton's commentary in the old ICC, which had just been released, and Machen responds to that. And he credits Burton as being a great philologist, but wouldn't know the theology of Paul from the other side of the moon.
What are some areas that we can really learn from Machen today, given the theological trends in Reformed circles?
Well, for me, and this could be very personal, and so you could take it with a grain of salt or maybe 2 grains. But I think the value of polemics. There seems to be a real reluctance today to engage in polemics, that somehow it's uncharitable, that somehow people's feelings will be hurt, that there's a sense that we're all on the same page, and we don't need to be critical of each other because everyone's good. It's all good. And as if error hasn't been part of the church throughout its history, as if error hasn't always needed to be corrected. I mean, Machen wrote brilliantly several essays about the importance of controversy, how you can't escape controversy even in the New Testament. The church has always been engaged in controversy. So people shouldn't back off from that and think it's somehow unchristian to engage in controversy. Now, on the other hand, I also think Machen understood that some people were temperamentally not wired that way. So, you got to figure out what your calling and duties are. And the other thing I would say has to do with the importance of the church and being a churchman. And so being engaged in the actual affairs of a particular communion or denomination, but being concerned what goes on at General Assembly, being concerned what goes on in the agencies of the church, not just looking at the local congregation and looking at that as a good ministry, but then looking at the corporate church, looking at everything that's going on in the denomination, and and not necessarily trying to poke your nose everywhere, because Machen was always aware of what was proper procedurally, whether it was appropriate for a presbyter in this presbytery to be sticking his nose in the business of another presbytery. Right. So you always have to be aware of the Book of Church Order, the way you do these things. But on the other hand, because it is a corporate body, if you're Presbyterian or Lutheran or Episcopalian, I mean, what's going on in another diocese or synod, or classis or presbytery is important to what's going on in the church corporately. So. So to be engaged in that way is, I think, also important. And what's undercutting that, I think, increasingly is a low view of the church, and evangelicalism being sort of the identity for all conservative Protestants. And so it doesn't really matter what church we belong to, as long as we're evangelical, it's okay.
Yeah. Excellent.
I also think that Machen's emphasis on the role of history and apologetics is as relevant today as it was when he was stressing it, because that's becoming a crisis, coming to a point of crisis in modern-day evangelicalism, because the postmodern emphasis upon history or the lack of it, or its de-emphasis, is becoming increasingly popular.
Yeah.
Do you mean history of theology, Gary, or
the role of history in apologetics?
Okay.
Machen's emphasis upon the historicity of the New Testament documents.
Right. No, exactly.
Well, we would encourage, of course, everyone to read Machen. Where would you start? If you hadn't read any Machen, where would you urge people to begin? With Christianity and liberalism?
Yeah, I still think, although, I mean, and this is going to sound self-promotional, so I mean, many of the essays that I helped to get back into print in the selected shorter writings were originally Stonehouse had put together in What is Christianity? So if you can find the old copies of Stonehouse's edition of that, that's fine. But many of those essays are really quite brilliant.
And that set's available from PNR. It's good to get. And Christianity and Liberalism, of course, as timely as ever, even though it's, 70, 80 years old now. Right.
But also the two works that Gary had mentioned, they're from the radio addresses, The Christian Faith in the Modern World and The Christian View of Man, are very accessible.
And What is Faith? That is perhaps one of my favorites.
Yeah, I actually think that gets neglected oftentimes. I
have given away dozens of copies of that book to people who had never heard of Machen. And found that book, I gave that away as a evangelistic tool back when I was in college, when it used to be, a paperback edition that I think Erdman's kept releasing.
Yeah, it's the right hook to the left jab of Christianity and liberalism. It really is. I mean, it was a 1-2 punch that he had in those two books regarding liberalism, Christianity, liberalism, and then What is Faith, published within 2 years of each other. And it in some ways, its claims are even bolder in there than Christianity and liberalism. Yeah.
By the way, Darryl, I read somewhere that of all of his writings, his Greek New Testament grammar outsold all his other books combined.
Yeah.
That might be Westminster's fault.
I used it.
I used it too.
So did I.
Yeah, Camden?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a plug for Darryl's dissertation, Dr. Fundamentalis. If you read Defending the Faith and you enjoy that and you want a little more detail, the dissertation is well worth reading.
Yeah, I had to. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I had to, for a university press, basically, I had a friend who was an editor I played basketball with at Johns Hopkins. So he did a dissertation himself on a loser in American history. So he liked to print books about losers in American history. And but he didn't know Machen from Adam. And then all the Presbyterian denominational history, well, that kind of had to go. So there is more of that in the dissertation.
Excellent. And for the record, it is pronounced Gresham.
It is Gresham.
That's right.
Anyway, that just for the record. Well, thanks, Darryl and Gary, Nick, and Jeff. We really appreciate this time you guys have spent to come. We appreciate you coming over, Darryl, and being able to talk to us about our forefather in many ways, for us involved in the OPC, and also for others involved in Westminster and just Reformed theology in general. We would like to point people to the website. You can go to castlechurch.org. You can read today's show notes and download the bibliography. You can also get a hold of us at castlechurch.org/contact, or subscribe to our feeds and see what else is going on. But until then, we want to thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you back next time on Christ the Center.